I'm Taylor.
I'm Kat.
And welcome to Square Mile of Murder. And hey guys, we made it to episode 80.
Woohoo!
How is anyone's guess, really? But yeah, so
sheer spite.
Yeah, just
we will do it.
Just like, God damn it, we're getting there.
But technically we've done more than 80 because our Halloween ones didn't count in our numbering system.
Yes, that's true. They were just like a bonus, so they weren't numbered. So it's all a lie, is what we're telling you. There's no truth in our advertising.
We're both very sleep deprived.
But yeah, no, that's pretty cool. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
episode stuff. So a lot of murder and other things.
Lots of crime. Lots of fraud.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you didn't realize by now, we don't just do murder, which I realize is slightly confusing with the name.
Given the title.
But anyway, we've been here for 80 episodes. Can you tell? Do we sound just tired? Quite clearly. But yeah, so 80, that's a nice 10. A 10.
A round number.
Round number. What is it? Multiple of 10.
Interval,
something. Math class from 6th grade. Don't remember it. We've come to a 10 episode, and you know what that means, unless you don't, unless you're new here, in which case, hi, we have 79 other episodes at least for you to listen to. Go check them out. And let us explain what we're doing here today. So every 10 episodes, we cover a Scottish case. And we started that with the 4 Square Mile murders, appropriately enough, for episodes 10, 20, 30, and 40. And then we just kind of kept going and carried on from there with a new Scottish case every 10 episodes. So that's what we're doing this week. And sticking with this month's theme of ancient serial killers, we've actually managed to find an old Scottish killer for you by the name of Geordie Bourne. So let's get right to it.
I know that we say this so many times. We've already said it 1,000 times this month, and you're probably sick of hearing it. But records back in the day of these ancient serial killers weren't anyone's priority.
No. I also feel like we say it just in every other episode too. Like anything that didn't happen within the last 5 years, we're like,
Yeah. I mean, really, I think record keeping in the way we think it now is like a post-Second World War thing.
Yeah.
I think that sort of the late 40s into the 50s seems to be when records started to become much more comprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, and also like generalized across Western society as well, because you've got
like
a lot of
unified as well.
Yeah, like different countries and places doing different things as well.
Yeah, but because we're on ancient serial killers this month, we're going back way further than that, and as such, we don't know exactly when or where Geordie Bourne was born. We do know that he was born sometime in the 16th century, and that he was Scottish. But that's about it.
Which is not a lot.
Yeah, this is like, when some stories were like, we don't know much about their childhood. We don't know anything about his.
We don't know anything about his childhood, his young adulthood, most of his adulthood.
Like...
Just him in general.
Yeah. But what we do know is that Geordie led a band of men who carried out raids and attacks on Englishmen in the English East Marches.
So that's what we know. So the English Marches were an area to the south of the Anglo-Scottish border, and the Scottish Marches were the area to the north. Now, march comes from the Old English word for border, so that kind of makes sense.
Which actually comes from an old French word before that.
Oh, well, of course. Sacre bleu.
Yeah.
So the marches were used as a sort of buffer zone between Scotland and England in medieval times, before the Acts of the Union unified the two countries in 1707. Each country had an east, west, and middle march. Oh, is that where that phrase comes from? All the marches on both sides of the border were characterized by violence, with attacks and cross-border raids being a pretty regular thing. The marches are now known as the Borders, and what was the English East March is now the northeastern part of the county of Northumbria and includes the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, which was an important border town fought over for centuries and is currently on the English side.
Yeah, I think it's been on the English side for a few hundred years.
I know. I like the way you've said that. It's like, who knows next week? It could be back to Scottish.
Well, all these arguments about independence and everything.
Who knows? They could secede.
And every so often the North wants to secede as well.
Yeah.
We want to go with Scotland sometimes.
Join us.
So... but yeah, it's quite funny. I was at undergrad with a couple of guys who were from Berwick, and everyone thought they were Scottish because accents are so similar because it's on the border.
Actually, I think I've totally heard someone from there speak and thought that they were Scottish.
Yeah, it's like a very generic sort of Scottish accent.
Yeah,
is the best way I can describe it. So border raids were so common that there was a name for those who carried out these attacks and raids in the borders during this period, and that is border reivers, if we're pronouncing it right.
Yes.
But we're going with this pronunciation because it makes sense.
Yeah, Reiv. That sounds like reivers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be Reivers.
Yeah, and that doesn't make sense to me because that would be I before E.
Yeah.
I think it's reivers.
Yeah, I do too. It's like Firefly. Isn't that a thing in Firefly? I don't know. You tell me, fellow listeners.
You have lost me.
It's too nerdy.
Okay.
Move along.
So, if you didn't know, England and Scotland were at war very frequently during these times, so from the 13th to 17th centuries, which obviously led to a lot of turbulence in the area.
Which definitely has never happened since. No turbulence.
No. And even when the two countries were not at war, there was a lot of tension and unrest in the area. And just throughout the whole of the United Kingdom, really.
Yeah.
Although the border was hotly contested, law enforcement and royal power had little control over the area, especially in the more rural regions away from the main border towns like Berwick and Carlisle, which led to crime and violent raids all over the marches. And we also have to consider that these raids weren't just about exerting power and violence over others. Sometimes there were thefts that were simply about surviving, stealing food, supplies, and whatever else you needed to get by.
Fair enough.
Not that that excuses it, but,
no, but
that's how dire the situation got.
Yeah.
Was that you had to resort to thieving to survive.
Yeah. And now we tend to think of these raids as being led by nationalism. You know, one group crossing the border, raiding a place, then hopping back across the border home safe. Even when it was about stealing to survive, it was about stealing from the other side. But in reality, the raids were of a more sort of indiscriminate nature. It didn't matter if you were an Englishman stealing from the English or a Scot stealing from the Scottish, as long as you weren't stealing from your own family and friends or those with protections. Yeah, it was like a pretty much anything goes situation. The region seemed to be a fairly lawless place, which is ironic considering there were specific regional laws applicable only to the marches. I can't say it. I suddenly have a cold. Imaginatively known as march law. Seems appropriate.
Yeah. Interesting side note, the Anglo-Welsh border and the Anglo-Irish border also have their own, or had their own version of march laws. Second interesting side note, The most common theft in the marches was that of livestock, because land in like the Anglo-Scottish border area isn't good for crop farming. It's mostly like arable land, which is good for livestock grazing, but it's not good for like crop cultivation. So cattle rustling, sheep rustling, pig rustling, they were
Big deal.
Yeah, they were the most common sort of property thefts.
Let's see. We've covered this sort of crime surprisingly a lot. Like Skidmore.
Yep. It's mostly when we go to Missouri.
Yeah.
Missouri. The senior citizen serial killers.
The Copelands.
Fane Ray Copeland, yeah.
And a particularly fantastic example of it in our recent 4th of July Dummies bonus episode, I must say.
Oh, yes, pig theft. That was fun.
Pig theft, yeah. So if that is a crime that interests you, we have you covered.
Livestock theft, that was the most common. And keep it in mind because it will become important soon.
It always does. It always does.
There's always a reason to our tangents.
I mean, there's sometimes a reason for it.
Let them think that we've got everything covered.
Okay.
Don't let anyone know that we're just hot messes.
I mean, I think 80 episodes in, if they haven't figured that out by now, then like they haven't been paying attention. So
yeah.
But we're glad you're here.
When we get to 100, there will be a quiz.
Oh God, I'm gonna have to prepare.
Not for you.
Oh, good. Well, then that's fine. It'll be really hard then, since I don't have to take it. Yeah. So the laws were essentially an agreement between the two countries to prosecute those who carried out cross-border raids and recover the stolen property. And they were enforced by the wardens of the marches. Each of the marches had their own warden who oversaw the region, and they answered to the Lord Warden, who was in charge of the entire border region. March laws were only in effect during peacetime, because they required cross-border cooperation, and if you were trying to conquer or annex parts of another country, I mean, that's not really gonna put them in the mood to cooperate. Go figure.
Yeah. Like, okay, well, we've got this side of your border now, but you need to help us out.
Yeah. It's like, nah, no thanks. But the problem with March law was that it only applied to cross-border offenses, and it didn't do anything to solve the problem of crime within each country's borders. So like Scot on Scot or English on English crime, right?
Yeah, that just didn't do anything for that, really. So, coming back to our antagonist. Most of what we know about Geordie Bourne comes from the account of Englishman Sir Robert Carey, was the first Earl of Monmouth. He was also the Lord Warden of the Marshes, who oversaw all the wardens on the English side of the border, as well as holding various positions of Warden of the Middle March and Warden of the East March at various times in the 1590s. Tensions in the border territories and raids being carried out by border reivers were at their height throughout the late 16th century and into the 17th century, before we finally get to the Acts of the Union at the beginning of the 18th century. And Carey is credited with helping ease tension in the marches, as well as helping to reduce crime and influence of the border reivers in the area.
Along with his Scottish counterparts, it seems that Sir Robert Carey was actually well aware of who Geordie Bourne and his band of man?
His one-man band.
Yeah, really. Yeah, like that one guy followed him around with the snare drum and the cymbals and the... Oh, God. I'm not even the sleep-deprived one here today.
No, that's my role. What's your excuse?
Utter stupidity. Okay, we're gonna go again. Along with his Scottish counterparts, it seems that Sir Robert Carey was actually well aware of who Geordie Bourne and his band of men were. and what he had been up to in the marches in the late 1590s. However, Carey, it seems, didn't get on well with some of his Scottish counterparts, especially Robert Kerr, 1st Earl of Roxburgh, who was appointed Warden of the Middlemarch in 1594. The pair had a series of long-running disputes throughout their tenure in the marches. Although we have to remember that Carey's account of the raids was edited in 1759 by the Earl of Cork and Orrery, and again in 1808 by Sir Walter Scott, so details may have been added or removed or edited in some way. Geordie Bourne had earned himself a reputation for traveling across the border from Scotland under the cover of darkness and stealing livestock.
So Carey had made attempts to work with Scottish March Warden Robert Kerr, hoping that if the two of them cooperated, they would be able to ease tensions in the borders and reduce the violent crime that took place. So he sent a servant with a letter to Robert Kerr, requesting that they meet in order to discuss the state of the borders. But Kerr, instead, got the servant drunk, waited till he passed out, then went out with some Scottish border reivers on a cross-border raid. During this raid, he murdered an unarmed Englishman.
Oops.
Yeah, that's not the kind of like cross-border cooperation that Carey's asking for.
Nah.
So sources vary, as always, but some say that the band of reivers was led by Geordie Bourne. Others say it was another group of reivers who had no connection to Geordie. But either way, the following morning, the servant awoke with a sore head and no idea what Kerr had been up to the previous night. He returned to Carey with a letter from Kerr agreeing to a meeting and, generally very positive about the two of them working together. But Carey soon discovered that Kerr had been involved in a raid, killing an Englishman. So he skipped the meeting, vowed never to work with Robert Kerr, and swore to avenge this wrong which had been committed against his fellow countrymen.
When you start avenging wrongs, it's not going to end well.
Slippery slope.
Yeah, it's never good. So as winter set in and the nights became longer and darker, raids in the marches increased, and Carey began patrolling the inroads from Scotland along with the garrison stationed in Berwick. One night they came upon Geordie Bourne and his men as they tried to herd stolen cattle across the border into Scotland. I'm just picturing that now. The cows don't move that fast, so I feel like it would be pretty easy to catch someone doing that.
Yeah, but it was 1597? So the technology is not where it is now.
True.
You'd still be, on horses.
But they are faster than cows, so.
They are, but you'd still be patrolling on horses. You wouldn't. It's not like you would have a quad bike going off-road and rounding them all up.
Geordie Bourne, stop right there. This is the police. Oh, God. Yeah, so they're trying to herd Bessies across the border into Scotland. One of the garrison shot Geordie's uncle as the raiders tried to flee back across the border, but they were caught before making it to safety. When Geordie was arrested, it was discovered that he was a close personal friend of Robert Kerr, who is described by the website Borders Reivers Stories, which is appropriately devoted to the history of the Reivers. Kerr was described as a warlord who had supported Geordie in his raiding and murdering of the English. Geordie believed that he was safe and that Kerr would come to his rescue. But things didn't exactly work out like that.
So some of the English were worried about the political situation and potential unrest that could be caused by the arrest of a friend of one of the wardens, but this didn't deter Robert Carey, who convened a jury the morning after Geordie's arrest to try him for treason.
Whoa.
Yeah. Ain't no messing about up in the borders. Along with the cross-border cattle rustling, Geordie was also discovered to have murdered 7 Englishmen during various raids. Geordie was found guilty of march treason, for which the only sentence was death. But Carey did eventually agree to hold off with the execution until Kerr had been informed, and even offered to spare Geordie on the assurance from Kerr that he would stop running with the border reivers, and instead, commit to his job as warden. And Geordie's sitting there quite confident that Kerr would spare his life.
I mean, that's a big ask to do your job properly. I don't know. So Geordie spent the night with a priest, confessing and repenting. He claimed to have lain with 40 men's wives on both sides of the border.
Now, I'm not sure if that's 40 on each side
or like
40 overall.
40 overall, yeah. Or if it's is it an even split? Is it like 20 and 20? Is it like 10 and 30?
I don't know.
It's a lot of questions there. And according to Carey's memoirs, Geordie said he had wasted his life drinking, whoring, and thieving. Unfortunately, there was no reply from Kerr, and the following day, less than 48 hours after being arrested, Geordie Bourne was executed. Kerr later vowed revenge on Carey for Geordie's execution, but Carey was moved from the marches to London the following year, and the two never fought hand-to-hand. The marches and their jurisdiction were abolished in 1707 with the Acts of the Union that formally unified England and Scotland. And that is the story of Geordie Bourne, Scottish border reiver and murderer.
Yeah. Interesting one.
Yeah, it's a short one because there's not that much information about it.
No, but I think it's quite interesting. Yeah. I do also have a slight tangent to... I half explained it to you before we started. So Geordies are people from Newcastle in the northeast of England. So when I started doing the research for this, I couldn't find anywhere that said that Geordie Bourne was Scottish.
Yeah.
All I could find was that he was in the English borders. And I started to think, oh, please let him be Scottish, because it's supposed to be a Scottish story, and not someone who is nicknamed Geordie.
Yeah.
And eventually I did find confirmation that he's Scottish. But what I also learned is basically I have got my my border history all wrong for most of my life. So in Newcastle, East Newcastle, there is a place called Wallsend, which is the end of Hadrian's Wall.
Makes sense.
So, Geordie, borders, can you see where I'm going with this and why I was getting confused? I was thinking, okay, so he's actually a Geordie, and he was in, so he's a Geordie guy, and he's in the borders, he's not necessarily Scottish.
Mm-hmm.
That is because I always thought, and I'm sure we were taught this, I'm sure it's not something I've just picked out of thin air, that Hadrian's Wall, which goes across England, parts of northern England, I always thought that was the original border.
Oh.
Which is why I was getting confused, and it's actually not. It was, it's a fortified wall, or was, and the Romans built it, and that was their, last line of defense from the Caledonians, which, are the Scottish. The border has always been up in the borders, way further north, in the area that it still is now. It's just that they built this defensive wall further south.
And then there's a buffer zone in between the two.
Yeah. Oh. So then you've got Northumbria and Cumbria, which are the two northernmost counties in England. Are your buffer zone between.
Yeah.
But I'd always thought that the wall was a border.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'm sure I'm not the only person who thinks this, because I'm sure I must have been taught it.
Well, and I feel like that's what you hear. The thing you hear about in terms of the border between, or the delineation between Scotland and England, is Hadrian's Wall. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I was getting myself really confused when I was doing the research, because I was like, he's called was like, okay, so he's in the borders and he's called Geordie. I was like, he can't be Scottish, he must be English. And then, learned this about the border.
There you go. We're all about learning new things here.
And so there's the origins of the word Geordie as a description for people from Tyneside. Like the origins are disputed, but most of them come about after Geordie Bourne was executed. So
just a coincidence.
But yeah. So there you go. You can all enjoy my historical confusion.
I mean, it didn't help that when I put it into the program, I said his name was George. So
no, that didn't help. That confused me as well.
Sorry about that. I think Geordie's a much better name.
It is. Another point. There's a lot of statues and tributes to the border Reivers in towns and cities on both sides of the border.
That's interesting.
So Galashiels, which is in Scotland, and Carlisle, which is in England, two of the sort of most prominent examples. They've got statues of the Reivers just kicking about the town centre.
Oh, that's really interesting, considering sort of how.
There was another role of the Reivers as soldiers during wartime.
That makes sense.
So I am going to assume it's more to do with that than it is to do with the raids.
Yeah, possibly.
But I find that quite interesting, especially at a time when the idea of statues and who we should have as what statues we should have and who we should celebrate is like a really hotly contested issue.
Yeah.
Has been for the last year.
Yeah. So it is interesting because it's, I mean, usually the things or the people that get memorialized in statues are seen to be rightly or wrongly by history as like the victor, the good guy, and not just like a band of weirdos who sometimes fight but sometimes thieve.
Yeah.
I'm also sure that some of these raids that the Reivers went on brought much needed supplies, food, livestock into either side. You know, it may have been ill-begotten, but it also, like we said before, helped people survive. So they were probably idolized for that.
Tentatively compare that to like Pablo Escobar. He, if Narcos is to be believed, is still like celebrated as like a folk hero in, especially in like the is it barrios, favelas, like the poor neighborhoods in Medellin.
Yeah,
because he gave them money, he helped them survive, he opened up various things in the community.
Yeah.
He killed a fuck ton of people.
Yeah.
And it's all blood money.
But still, I think it's interesting because it's like the main information about this guy comes from Carey's account, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So not only is Geordie Bourne's story basically written and told by the guy who executed him, like it's told by a guy in power in an opposing country. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's like what other, if they survived, what other information about him would be out there?
Yeah.
Because who knows? And also, like you said, that the Carey's recollections had been
they've been edited twice
and republished
hundreds of years after after this event.
Yeah, so like they could have just said whatever, basically.
Yeah,
whatever they wanted. So who knows? Maybe it wasn't cattle. Maybe it was ferrets. Ferrets are pretty fast, though. They wouldn't have had an issue with the with the Border Patrol
but
there.
you couldn't herd ferrets.
I don't know.
You could get them across the border, but you wouldn't find them again.
I mean, yeah, whatever.
They'd be like, nope, I'm out of here.
Haven't you heard of the wild ferret problem in Scotland?
But, I mean, you could even look at it in comparison to Sawney Bean. Which we know is propaganda by the English against the Scots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which came about after the Acts of the Union.
Yeah.
So, in the editing and rewriting of this story, it could have been done for propaganda purposes.
Yeah.
To make the Scots look bad.
Yeah.
Because the English like doing that.
You know, it's really interesting that you bring that up because I feel like every episode that we've done this month, we've mentioned Sawney Bean because it's the thing, and I think what it comes down to is with a lot of these ancient, quote unquote, ancient cases, is that they're all kind of a lesser version of that propaganda. Like, they've all been twisted over time. They've all been changed over time, where, like, Sawney Bean is the most extreme example. Like, there surely was highwaymen who, you know, patrolled by the sea in, it was like Ayrshire or something, right?
Yeah, central sort of west coast of Scotland.
Yeah, like, sure. But they probably weren't incestuous cave-dwelling cannibals. Like,
no.
So that's, like, the extreme. And then you have, like, Elizabeth Bathory, who, you know, probably killed some of her staff and some people, but maybe wasn't, you know, bathing in the blood of virgins or whatever it may be. So, like...
Yeah, and probably didn't kill 650. I've no doubt she killed
some.
Plenty, but I don't think she killed that many. Yeah,
exactly. And, like... But yeah, it's just, like, I think, if nothing else, this has shown us that history contorts. And as things get, or at least in the past, I don't know how this is going to change with the digital age, but that's a whole nother issue. Like, as things were written down versus passed along orally, like, they just, details get missed or details get changed, or someone is like, well, that doesn't make a good story. Let's add some cannibals in there. So, it's interesting.
But on the other side of that, in sort of the age of alternative facts and disinformation, we don't know. Like you say, history is always written by the victors.
Yeah.
And sure, people can reclaim the history through, like, very painstaking research. It can be reclaimed.
Yeah.
But we don't know what that's going to look like in 100 years, because look at what's happened this week in the Middle East.
Yeah. Did you hear about the thing where 20 people seized Edinburgh Castle yesterday?
I did.
Based on the Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta does not apply. Firstly, it does not apply anymore. It applied for less than 100 years. And secondly, it never applied to common folk. It applied to it applied to the landed gentry.
It applied to, like, literally 25 people.
Yeah.
But they seized the castle to take it back for the people because the Scottish government was being run by a band of pedophiles.
Also, sorry, the most important part of that, the Magna Carta was 800 years ago. That was before the Acts of the Union. The Magna Carta applied in England, not Scotland.
Yeah. And also, I was reading something, it's like, it never, the article that they were quoting was never actually made into a law. So even if it did apply to this group of people that they're saying it does, it wouldn't apply anyway because it was never a law.
Yeah. So I think they are going to be remembered as the fools.
Yeah.
But we don't know what is going to happen in Afghanistan. So we don't know what history is going to look like in 100 years.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how this is going to be remembered. Same as how Vietnam is remembered in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if, say, the Acts of the Union had gone the other way, and power had been held in Edinburgh rather than London,
Mm-hmm.
and, because you know how people use, like, England and the UK and Great Britain interchangeably,
Yep.
when they're really not the same thing.
Yeah.
And say instead it was like Scotland, instead of, Scotland and the UK and Great Britain interchangeably, these accounts would undoubtedly be different. Sawney Bean would be about English families. This border Reiver would be an English Reiver killing the Scottish. So, yeah. There's truth and outright lies in all of these records and these stories as they've been passed down over the years.
Yeah. And I think
I have lost the train of this conversation.
I think that the important thing also to remember with a lot of these stories and like quote unquote historical accounts is that nobody was watching Netflix back in the day. This was entertainment. Reading these things, some of them being performed like in public, sort of recited, like this kind of these grains of historical truth that then get turned into folklore was television, was theater and film and everything. So like just as what something that we've looked at, Wind River, it's not a real story, but it's based on real stories.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, it kind of makes sense that the facts are all a little bit loosey-goosey in some of these.
Yeah, because they've all had their own director's cut.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending who is telling the story.
Yeah. So, something to think about. But no, I think it's been a very enlightening month looking at some of these for me, because like when we came across this topic, I was like, okay, I'm gonna Google some ancient serial killers and see what pops up. And we've either covered this month most of the ones that we first sort of listed down, or we're gonna cover them later. But like they're definitely more than you think. Some of them are fucking crazy. And I don't know. People have been terrible to each other for centuries. Is that the moral of this story?
I think it is, because my interest in it as a sort of subject came from like, we talk about Jack the Ripper as the first serial killer ever. Yeah. And he wasn't. Even in just the few years leading up to his crimes, there were people all over England, killing anyone in sight with, strychnine or cyanide for insurance money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand, like, obviously the concept of him as the first serial killer because of, like, the media frenzy that surrounded it, but I was also, like, really interested in, like, there's so many well-known cases and less-known cases before that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, like, part of that is because they still don't know who did it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the lasting.
Yeah.
That's the enduring factor of Jack the Ripper, is everyone wants to solve this mystery.
Yeah. Whereas, like, well, and also at the point in time that happened in, like, the 1880s, right? Western society had shifted away from the sort of, like, if you think about L'Acusta of Gaul, the bonus episode that we did, like, the early Roman Empire was just basically a murder fest and, full of political infighting and literal backstabbing and, like, so by the 1880s, you know, we're in the industrial age. We've moved away from like literally killing your enemies to gain
from
power.
Literally having an apothecary on retainer to poison your enemies.
Yeah. So like it's more about social power instead of like, oh, that guy, he has the title I want. I'm going to murder him so I can have it. Or, you know, it's about financial power. So I think maybe that's why it's more shocking, because people didn't just kill to get what they wanted by that point.
Yeah.
Most people. So
I feel like we've taken a big detour, and we should probably save some of this for another time.
Why would you think that? I wholly disagree. Whatever. It's been an interesting month. Heard about some people that I've never heard about before, so
yeah.
that's been cool. But yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed this this topic, and if there are any others that we haven't covered that you think are really interesting, like let us know. We can always slip them in somewhere else in the future. So
yeah, and if you got any themes or ideas you'd like us to explore, tell us and we'll see.
Yeah. And you can tell them to us on social media, or you can email them to us at info@squaremilemurder.com. We have been getting some more emails lately, which is super awesome, and we love reading it. We do just want to say that while we will read every email that comes into the inbox, we don't always have time to respond to all of them, so do bear that in mind. If you're looking for more of a like direct line of communication with us, Patreon is your best bet. If you like the show, rate us and review us, especially on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe wherever you listen. And you know, you've heard this. We have merch. If you want merch, you can get merch. And you can get it at squaremileofmurder.store.
Yeah. And Patreon does help us cover the costs of making this podcast and help us invest in the future of the show. Tiers start at just £1 per month. Every patron gets to chat to us or chat to each other, you know.
Yep.
Make your own little community. You get regular episodes a day early, a shout out on the show, priority case requests, and a lifetime discount on merch. As the tiers go up, you get even more, including bonus episodes and exclusive stationery merch that you can't buy anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So check that out at patreon.com/squaremileofmurder. Links are in all the usual places. And we will be back. We'll be back on Friday for patrons with our monthly ramble.
Yes.
For everyone else, we will be back next Wednesday. Thank you for listening. We'll see you then.
Yeah. Thanks so much. See you later, guys.
Bye.
Bye.